I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. Our look back through the vampire films from Hammer Studios is at an end with the 9th and final film in their series of Dracula films, The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. They don't make them like this anymore. To be fair, they never made them like this. A co-production between Hammer Studios and the Shaw Brothers studio, mixing Hammer vampires with Chinese Kung Fu, featuring Peter Cushing playing Van Helsing for the last time. Are you sold? We open with a prologue set in 1804 where Count Dracula is visited by a Chinese priest from Pingqiao who serves the legendary seven golden vampires. Carr begs Dracula for his help in reviving the golden vampires whose power is fading to help regain control over the region. Then we jump forward 100 years to 1904 and we join Van Helsing as he's on a lecture tour of China. He tells the legend of how one of the villagers from Pingqiao managed to kill one of the seven golden vampires, which we see in a lengthy flashback. But in these enlightened times, no one believes in vampires. This is a great excuse for Peter Cushing to sound authoritative on the subject of vampires once again and to insist vampires do exist one last time. Everyone leaves the lecture bar one person, who is Si Ching, who happens to come from Pingqiao. Si Ching enlists the vampire hunter, Van Helsing's son, and a wealthy widow, Vanessa Buren, who funds the expedition, into making the perilous journey to Pingqiao and ridding the village of its vampiric curse once and for all. On the journey, they'll be protected by Si Ching, his 6 brothers and 1 sister, who are all experts at martial arts and each have their particular signature weapon. They fight a local crime boss and his gang of thugs, and as they near Pingqiao, they fight again with the 6 remaining golden vampires and their horde of the undead. This all leads to a final battle between the armies of the undead and our band of adventurers within the walls of the besieged village. It was never intended for Dracula to appear in this movie, but Warner Brothers insisted, so the character of Dracula bookends the movie, and it's the only time in a Hammer Dracula film that the Count hasn't been played by Christopher Lee. The part this time goes to John Forbes Robertson in a workmanlike performance. He's not asked to do much and he has an appropriately booming voice, but he is hampered by having to wear so much makeup that he looks like a drag queen Dracula, a Dragula, I guess. It's a real pity because the 1804 introduction to Dracula is great. He does the Nosferatu rise from the tomb, stiff backed straight up like that, and then he floats down from the dais onto a level with Carr, and you're thinking, oh, this is all nice and eerie, but why does he just look like he's followed a YouTube makeup tutorial whilst drunk? Without a doubt, Christopher Lee would have added something special, something not on the page that he always gives to the character, even for scripts he's completely disdainful of. There's always a certain electricity that comes with Lee and Cushing together on screen, which just can't be replicated with any other actor. Plus, it would have been an absolute blast to see Lee bookend this completely nutso film. The Chinese vampires are of a different stripe altogether, and I kind of love them. They're really lo-fi with sort of rotten fish-eyed faces hidden behind golden masks, and their undead army wear skull masks rather than makeup to make them look decomposed. Gives them the feel of some of those later, cheaper Italian zombie flesh eater sequels. Some may find it laughable, but it made me think of the mask work in No Theatre, which I know is Japanese and not Chinese, but still. Some of the extra shuffling around even managed to get in a few hops, and I admittedly know next to nothing about Chinese hopping vampires. I believe one features in a film called Mr. Vampire. If any of you guys out there, you will be more knowledgeable than me on Chinese hopping vampires. Are the Mr. Vampire films worth it? Are there any other good Chinese vampire movies with hopping vampires that I need to check out? Let me know in the comments down below, please. The sets are pretty great, especially at the start and the end of the movie, bookending again. You've got Castle Dracula at the start and the Golden Vampire's Pagoda at the end, both lit in a lurid green that makes them feel like they've popped straight out of an EC horror comic. Then you have the setup in that pagoda, half-naked women shackled to altars arranged in a circle so that they can be bled to feed into a bubbling cauldron of blood at the centre. What on earth is that about? This is the closest Hammer gets to Grindhouse, but if you have any idea what that cauldron of blood is for, please let me know. Continuity goes kablooey. I remembered this falsely as slotting nicely in with the continuity of the 1958 Dracula, also known as Horror of Dracula. But this epilogue is set quite a ways before Van Helsing and Dracula meet in the original film, and then Drac poses as this Chinese priest Ka and buggers off to China for a century. Yet, when we jump to 1904, it's acknowledged in the film many times that Van Helsing has already faced off against Count Dracula. Has Dracula been moonlighting as Ka in China whilst pinging back and forth across the continents to keep up his regular Dracula duties in Eastern Europe? And while we're asking questions about the movie, why is Dracula trapped inside the confines of his castle at the start of the movie anyway? Meaning that he has to sort of take over the mortal flesh of Ka to even be able to leave his castle. And what is that? What does he do? Possess him? Become him? I have no idea. At a certain point, it's best to stop asking questions of a movie like The Seven Golden Vampires. Nowadays, we're much more familiar and comfortable with these kind of mashups, but back then, did it work? To an extent, yes, but it is not a complete success. Extremely different working practices, along with a language barrier, made for a difficult shoot. All this while trying to produce something new and fairly off the wall. It's a horror-tinged adventure yarn. Could you say that it maybe had an influence on Stephen Sommers' Mummy films? We have martial arts and vampires. Is it at all possible that it had some slight influence on Joss Whedon's Buffy the Vampire Slayer? And while the concept sounds gonzo enough to be brilliant, and there are bits of it that are great, pacing is a real issue. All the elements are here for a phenomenal horror adventure, but as we've seen so many times since, that is a mix that is extremely difficult to get right. For every Brendan Fraser mummy, there's a Tom Cruise mummy. So we get a prologue, then jump forward 100 years, then straight into a flashback before getting the team together and then embarking on a journey where the pace grinds to a halt. There are a few fights on the way, but they all seem like bullet points, sort of stages in a side-scrolling game before we reach the boss level at the end. Just a little remix would have done wonders. Give the flashback to Ka in the prologue as he's explaining to Dracula what happened to the Golden Vampires. Then we could jump to Van Helsing and stay with him for a while. Have the journey be a little more fraught with our travellers perhaps becoming ever more affected by the perfidious influence of the vampires the closer to Ping Kuei they get. Maybe a dream sequence, some subconscious influence to try and sow discord among the group as they reach their destination. Then have them face the undead army before finally facing off against the Golden Vampires at the end, rather than have the final siege be a round 2 after 3 of the remaining 6 have already been done in. There are boobs, blood, limbs chopped off, monsters melting or turning to ash, kung fu fights, big large group fights, but it never seems to coalesce into the completely gonzo film that it should be. It really doesn't let loose until the final siege, which is a real highlight, and then suddenly people are dropping left and right. But we've had quite a trudge to get there. And the final confrontation between Van Helsing and Dracula is over in a blink. The film wasn't a box office success. There was a planned sequel to be titled Kali, Devil Bride of Dracula, which would have seen Van Helsing fighting vampires in India. This sounds instantly awesome. Sadly, we'll never know. We just have the title and the concept, and that just has my mind racing. Hammer always seemed to want to explore the continued adventures of Van Helsing. For goodness sake, the second ever Dracula film in the series was essentially that. The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires isn't a busted flush though. This is not such a crazy film that you'll invite your friends over to watch and have beers with, but it should be. However, it's a fine watch to pass a Sunday afternoon if you're in the mood for something hammerish that's a little outside the norm. Besides, Peter Cushing in a pith helmet is life.